So thank you both for joining us for this. And as we have seen this year, it has followed the trends of the years past in just that cyber criminals are moving faster. They're changing up their operations. They are signing up for customer services, providing it on their own. So Howard, I would love to hear, what are the growing threats that your office is dealing with? We were talking about ransomware earlier this morning, and I know that that is big, but alongside ransomware, what else is the FBI dealing with?
Sure. So explosive growth industry, unfortunately. So yeah, of course, ransomware is one of those problems. Business email compromise, also one of those problems. Another interesting wrinkle that we've seen this year, and if you followed some of these stories in the news, you'll understand what I'm talking about. We've now had kind of a blending or a merging of nation-state actors and criminal actors, which is not something that we've necessarily seen over the last 3 or 4 years. So there are some traditional threats out there, and then there's this other threat on the side, which is independent of each other, but now starting to merge, and that's a particular concern to us.
So there's also been these reports of attacks that also have ransom attached, but it's not ransomware. Can we kind of talk about the difference between a ransomware attack and extortion attack? And these extortion attacks have hit media companies like HBO and Time Warner and Netflix, and I would love to hear how the FBI differentiates between those attacks.
Well, we wouldn't necessarily differentiate between the two as much as we would acknowledge that there's a victim and there needs to be a response from the government, and in this case from the FBI. So we would look at ransomware attacks in terms of where they occur, who the victim is, the level, the sophistication of the victim, whether or not they're able to mitigate their system, what exactly the attacker has, or what do they purport to have. The bottom line, whether it's ransomware or just an extortion attempt, the bottom line is the earlier you get to law enforcement, the more likely you are to resolve it successfully. These things don't, unfortunately, happen fast, but there are investigative tools and techniques that can be used. But again, it's the awareness, law enforcement's awareness and involvement early in the process. And I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent here. We have an entire section dedicated to outreach and engagement. So the saying goes in our building is, let us not meet over a smoldering crater. The time to develop those trust relationships is long before the incident happens. I think everybody in the room would agree with this is not an if proposition, it's a when proposition. So we, again, an entire section whose sole focus is outreach, so we can get those relationships established and built, so when this problem happens, and it will happen, we can respond, and the private sector understands what the response will look like, what it is we'll need, and the direction of the investigation. So those are the types of things to consider. Not so much a difference between the two.
And with ransomware, business email compromise, these extortion attacks, Karen, given your expertise in both the public sector and private sector, I would love to hear which class of attack worries you the most.
Between the ransomware or the extortion, or
whether it's that or whether it's something else. I mean, I'm sure we could be here all day talking about.
we could be here all day. Actually, I think, and you hit on a great point, Howard, is the outreach that the FBI does. Because I think the biggest thing that makes me worried is when senior leadership believes, or people say, hey, if you give me X amount of dollars, I can prevent XYZ from happening. I think if any CISO goes in and says that, both private industry or public sector, they should be fired. Because it's really about when is it going to happen, and are you adequately prepared? And then do you have a response plan? So I really worry about the idea of properly preparing for when it happens so that you have an adequate response that goes back, because it's going to happen. It's just, what's the magnitude of it happening?
So with that response, and Howard, you were talking about outreach, can you give us some more details on the process that the FBI goes through when an organization reaches out, how that process works?
Sure. Well, our hope is that we have that outreach long before your event happens, and there are lots of public-private sector partnerships that the FBI is involved with. We're involved heavily with NCFTA, which is actually a headquarters entity, but it's set up in Pittsburgh. It's a private sector alliance that works under the umbrella of a 501c3, and it's the industry's opportunity to get their analysts together and funnel data to the government, so we can maybe even try to get ahead of some of these issues and maybe hopefully be a little more predictive than we've been in the past. We do an InfraGard. If you're not familiar with the InfraGard program, that is a FBI-sponsored organization, or at least was started by the FBI. It's now its own entity, but very closely aligned with the FBI. We do threat briefings with our InfraGard members. We try to pass, I know the push and pull, the yin and yang between the federal government and the private sector is you guys want more, and we would love to give you more, but a lot of it's classified. But in the instances where we have these pre-existing relationships and we can declassify something as quickly as possible, we will generally get it to those groups first. So think NCFTA, think InfraGard. DSAC is another organization that's established for the same purpose. Although the DSAC group is not necessarily as technically inclined as our InfraGard group, the principle is the same. We push as much information into those channels as we can. So we've got those relationships out there. If you're interested in them, they're not hard to find. You can find them with a simple Google search, or you can call your local FBI field office, and they'll be more than happy to help you out.
Now, with all of those agents and all of those opportunities available, there has been a mixed message a little bit when it comes to ransomware, so I'm letting you clear the air. I would love to hear what your official response is when organizations come to you and say, what should we do about this ransom? Should we pay it? Should we not? Should we talk to the FBI? What can you shine on as
Sure.
far as official policy there?
Right, the million-dollar question, and it may be a million-dollar question. So here's the Bureau's official position. If someone has attacked you, they're a criminal. Right? We don't normally trust criminals, right? So we will, our counsel to you all would be, don't pay the ransom. But we're acutely aware of the fact that there are all kinds of business interests, shareholder interests, executive interests, customer interests, and you all may make, or the private sector entity that's involved may have to make an uncomfortable decision to pay a ransom. Now, what people need to be aware of is there are more and more ransomware attacks that disguise themselves as ransomware, but there's actually no way to decrypt your information. The only really effective tool is to back up your system. That's really the only way to protect yourself. Can you pay the ransom? If that's your decision, we're going to treat you as a victim whether you pay it or not. We're not going to re-victimize you and second guess your decision. We may ask to participate. There may be an investigative reason or a technique that we can use if we are involved at that level, but no one from the FBI is going to second guess a business entity who is faced with that kind of decision.
Karen, I would love to hear your thoughts. Based
Well, I
on-
was gonna echo Howard's position here, is that, and oh, by the way, the FBI and Secret Service work very closely with the U.S. Cyber Challenge and come out every summer to our camps. And we go through a lot of this, and this is one of the big topics that is talked about. But the one thing that everybody agrees upon is that if you do the backups, you're in a much better position because you're already dealing with a criminal in the first place. So there's no guarantee, even if you pay the ransom, that you still get your stuff back. And so, you know, I'm going to keep coming back to it's good hygiene. There's a lot of things that you can do, and what you really want to do is raise the bar so it's a little tougher, just like a regular security system, that's a little tougher for your entity. I'm not saying advocating that they move on to somebody else, but what we're trying to do is raise the bar so that you can really kind of discern the noise through the system and give the opportunity for the FBI and Secret Service to work with the real criminals or do the real attribution going back.
So, Howard, you were talking about all of the agents that are out in the field to help with these cyber investigations, and I know that there are a lot of international attachés attached to the FBI that help with international investigations. And there is such a cybersecurity workforce shortage that we're dealing with right now. So I would love to hear how the FBI is sort of combating that, not just at a technical level, but getting people in that understand cybersecurity, but can do stuff that's just beyond the technical level.
Sure, so this is a huge challenge for us. As a matter of fact, I would tell you it's probably one of our biggest. There is a gap, and it isn't just the FBI that has this problem. I think it's just about every law enforcement entity probably even the intelligence entities as well. There's a gap, a knowledge gap. And unfortunately, I'm probably part of that generation, didn't grow up with a computer. And so we have a significant portion of our agents and our investigators that are not what we would probably call tech savvy, that are not going to be much help when it comes to the technical side of the investigation. So identifying this as a threat, we have a long-term strategy and a short-term fix or solution. So the long-term strategy is we have 10 pilot field offices where we're pushing out basically a STEM program, a STEM challenge. And this is a fantastic opportunity for people that want to step up and shoulder the burden of the mission for the FBI. So what we want to do is catch these kids in high school. We want to get them in STEM programs, and then we want to get them into colleges and universities that sponsor scholarship for service. During those summers off between semesters, we want to bring them in as college interns and get their clearances done and passed and get them on board and start working with us and understand what the mission is, and then guarantee those folks a job when they graduate, provided they follow the course of study and they make their grades, and guarantee them a job when they finish. Now, it might not be as an agent, but get them through the door as an intelligence analyst or professional staff member, get them on board. Now, I say that's the long-term fix because we won't see the fruits from that labor for another 5 or 6 years. And with the scholarship for service, it's a 2-year service agreement. So if they stay with the Bureau for 2 years, the government pays their school debt. Zero debt. So I think it's a great long-term strategy. Short-term strategy, we've had to use things like on-job training. We've identified agents out in our field offices that have a proclivity for cyber. We've tested them. We bring them into a training program. It lasts 6 months. And they are certified as cyber agents when they finish it. We've also partnered with SANS. We've had a long-standing contract with the SANS organization for training. And we have put hundreds of non-cyber agents through SANS training to get them baselined and get them to have a basic understanding of what happens when you're in the Paducah, Kentucky RA, and you get a phone call and somebody says, "Hey, I'm a CISO at a small rural hospital in Kentucky, and my system's locked up. What do I do?" There are only 2 agents out there, and if none of them know how to respond to that, we have a problem. So we have gone to great lengths to try to fill that gap, and we're seeing it start to fill in, but it's not something that happens overnight. So.
And Karen, I would love to hear, based on what he said as far as short-term and long-term strategy, whether, you deal with this a lot at the Cyber Challenge,
Right.
so I'd love to see if you see this kind of proliferating throughout the federal space.
Okay, so there's a lot of work, obviously, when I left that I knew workforce was going to be the issue. So the U.S. Cyber Challenge took on the idea of answering the problem for today, because what Howard's talked about is midterm to long-term. So if you believe STEM is the solution, that's a midterm, long-term solution. There are a lot of people today that have the talent, and so if you give them the ability through competitions to be able to demonstrate that they can analyze, and you really want people out of the traditional field, not necessarily computer science. Some of the best people in this area are people that come from communications, from business, music. The way that they look at the problems and the way that people can use technology, use applications, use data, you want a very mixed, blended group of people. And so the competitions really give you an opportunity to be able to demonstrate that I have that thought process, and my degree might be, my 4-year degree might be in communications. So hire me because I've applied the capability, and then I can do on-the-job training like Howard talked about, and then expand out my technical capabilities. And so the U.S. Cyber Challenge is really trying, along with a lot of other competitions, to identify potential in workforce today, because right now there's a shortage of at least 15,000 people in the federal space alone that need to be able to address these issues. And they don't all have to be computer forensics analysis. You need to think about, like, you need to have first responders in this area that can actually identify what's going on and then know that they need to call the FBI or Secret Service.
Great. Well,
I was going to say, this is a problem that's expanding, right? I mean,
Right.
it's only going to get bigger.
It's getting bigger. It's
Yep.
a great field, so you should go into it because it's only going to grow. By 2020, it's supposed to be a $101 billion industry.
I think everybody in this crowd would love to be able to funnel into that line of money and also contribute to the solving of this problem that we have. So I thank you very much for all of this, and
It's lunchtime.
lunchtime, everybody.
It's lunchtime. All right.
Who wants to be the person standing in between?